OK, so if due process was followed at all times, why did you sack the guy in charge of the process? Why did you sack Ollie Robbins?
I sort of wonder whether the PM spit the dummy a bit in the sense that he was so bloody angry that he kind of shot from the hip, when in fact maybe that wasn't a smart thing to do.
I had to fire the head of the FCDO because he showed such bad judgment by failing to tell me about it.
And you have to leave your post for it, where does that leave the Prime Minister?
Hello, you're watching Electoral Dysfunction with me, Beth Rigby.
Me, Ruth Davidson.
And me, Harriet Harman.
And I, like the rest of Westminster, I'm on manoeuvres again. Not in a budget hotel this time. I'm in a little podcast studio here in Manchester because I've just been speaking to the Green Party leader, Zach Polanski, on the election campaign up here. So I'm getting around all of the party leaders at the moment.
Now, of course, it has been yet another massive week in politics. Keir Starmer's Peter Mandelson woes show no signs of abating, and that's what we're going to focus on here today.
So let's dive into that now.
It feels like so much has happened since we last spoke. Okay, take a deep breath. We had Ollie Robbins before the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. He is the former head of the Foreign Office. We then had the Cabinet Office most senior civil servant, Kat Little, who gave evidence on Thursday morning. We've had Starmer in the Commons, but we did a special pod for you for that. Thank God, because otherwise this pod would be about 2 hours long. And now, next week, we've got Morgan McSweeney, the former Chief of Staff of the Prime Minister, summoned to the committee on Tuesday morning. And this is my mic drop moment. Philip Barton. Now, all of you are going, who's Philip Barton? Philip Barton is who was the permanent secretary, the most senior civil servant at the Foreign Office before Ollie Robbins, right? So Philip Barton left his post 8 months earlier than planned, didn't see out his 5-year term. He's now working in academia. I've been trying to get in touch with him as in probably the whole lobby, and he has been scrupulously silent on all of what happened in the Foreign Office around the time the Prime Minister decided to appoint Peter Mandelson. But he's going to appear at the Select Committee as well on Tuesday. So that is now, for me, I cannot wait to hear what Philip Barton has to say, because genuinely he is the sort of a missing piece of this jigsaw.
The question is very much in my mind now. I'd assumed that the high-level vetting done by UKSV really didn't turn up much more than what the Prime Minister already knew, which was twice sacked, Epstein, and therefore it wouldn't have told Starmer anything that people didn't already know. But actually, I'm now, having seen Starmer in the House of Commons and having listened to Ollie Robbins saying that he didn't actually read the UKSV report, which then was submitted to the Prime Minister and made the Prime Minister explode. It makes me wonder whether or not there was much, much worse information in the developed vetting than we'd actually seen hitherto in the newspapers and in the due diligence report from the Cabinet Office. We do know from the Ollie Robbins evidence that it was not information about the Epstein connection which made them, according to Ollie Robbins, lean against recommendation, and according to their form, say absolutely to block it. It was something else. So I think there's now a question mark about what was in that vetting. And
That's
it's very
fascinating.
difficult to know who was right and who was wrong, and whether Keir Starmer was justified and entirely within his rights to be firing Ollie Robbins, unless we know what was in that information. So I think this is now the Intelligence and Security Committee are a more or less permanent session now, 9 to 5, reading all these documents, sifting them, sending them back to the Cabinet Office to then be put out to the public. But I think, and I know that they will be very mindful that they should be recommending that you don't publish security vetting, because otherwise, why would anybody go through it? But I think we're not really going to be able to have a proper account of what's really gone on, so that we can make a judgment, and the public won't really understand the situation as truthfully as they need to without the security vetting is actually published. When Keir Starmer was speaking in the House of Commons, he was in a sense of outrage, and he said anybody in my position who would have seen that stuff would have felt absolutely I was right to fire Ollie Robbins. But the point is, he is the only person who's talking about it, who's actually seen it. And at the moment, the public are being asked to take it on trust that it was absolutely terrible what was in the vetting. But of course, until the public have seen that, it's difficult for them to understand why he became so outraged.
So that's really interesting to me, because I also listened to the Ollie Robbins testimony, and what was clear was, number one, he challenged the idea that Mandelson had failed security vetting. He said that's not how it works. I was told it was a borderline case and the UK security vetting services were minded not to approve Mandelson. But he said that he only had an oral conversation over this. He obviously didn't read the summary of evidence. What emerged on Thursday from Cat Little in the Cabinet Office, I didn't watch the session, but I've picked up on the main points. It is that she had to get that security advice. She got the summary document directly from the vetting services, because Ollie Robbins would not hand that over, because that's the due process he said he was following. What's not clear to me is whether or not she saw that information and has shared that document with the Prime Minister, because these documents are meant to not be shown to ministers, right? So I don't know if he's seen it, but what you're saying there, Harriet, is if he has seen it, or if he has been given more details of it from the civil service working in the Cabinet Office, that there could be more bombshells in there, which on the one hand justifies his decision to sack Robbins if he saw things that really shocked him. If that comes out and it's really even worse than we already know about Mandelson, the original sin of the judgment to put him in the first place comes back to bite Starmer even more badly, right?
To be honest, the judgment is already in question after Ollie Robbins' testimony, because he was very clear as well that his department was asked to find an ambassadorial or head of mission, as the wonk speak is, job for Matthew Doyle. Now, he's the other guy that worked at Number 10. He'd been a press secretary. He got elevated to the Lords instead of giving an ambassador role when the Foreign Office hit. No, he's clearly not qualified to be an ambassador. Take a look at yourself. He's the other person that has now been suspended and is in disgrace. The other thing as well is, when you look at these, the question you sort of always ask yourself, the bigger question is, does the witness seem credible? Do they seem on top of the information? Do they seem as if they've got a coherent story to tell? And I think the answer to that from Ollie Robbins is yes on all of these fronts. Yes, there's gaps in it and we don't know things. There's lots of things that we still don't know. But I think we also had some breadcrumbs from Ollie Robbins, where he clearly wants the committee to do more work. He clearly wants the committee to speak to his predecessor, Sir Philip Barton, a good friend, which suggests that it might not be great for the Prime Minister if the committee speak to him, because he was talking so much about the continuous pressure that the Foreign Office was under before he even arrived in it, because the announcement was made before he was put in post. So I think, that is also something that we'll need to discover.
In relation to Matthew Doyle, the Prime Minister was pressed on this by Kemi Badenoch at Prime Minister's Question Time. And I got the impression that he was not accepting that he knew about it in advance. In fact, it was the first question he was asked, even before Kemi Badenoch got up. He was asked, did you know about Matt Doyle being proposed by Number 10 to the FCDO, that the Foreign Office should make him an ambassador? And he didn't answer it directly. I took it as meaning that he didn't know about that.
I took it the other way.
He's run out of road of saying, I didn't know about it, it wasn't my fault. But everybody else seems to have taken the impression that he did know about it. And the reason why I took the impression that he didn't know about it is because in my mind, I would have thought he would take very seriously the idea that whilst for the Lords, you can propose somebody for the Lords on a political list, and you've got a political opportunity to put in people, who've been part of your party, but you can't do that with embassies. You can't do that with ambassadorships. And I would have thought Keir Starmer would be very mindful that you can't manage somebody out of a job you want to get them out of number 10 from, and use an ambassadorship like that. And therefore, I was assuming that there's no way he would have known that that had been happening, because he wouldn't have got along with it. Having said that, if you employ people that do that sort of thing, well, then you're not directly responsible.
You're a more
but it's
generous
not good
person
to
than
be
me,
employing
Harriet.
people. But I think that is quite problematic. But I think the interesting thing about the Ollie Robbins evidence to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee is that he said he didn't read the information that was in the security vetting file. He just had a discussion about it. But I'd got the impression from Kat Little's evidence to the same committee on Thursday that she did show that vetting evidence to the Prime Minister.
Okay.
And that's when he went nuclear, and that's
Okay.
when he fired Ollie Robbins. But I still think the people in the party out in the country are thinking, we wish he hadn't have fired him, however much justification he had, because he's put a nuclear bomb under the whole thing.
Well, I
And he
think-
wouldn't have
so-
had to
so
do
my
the
taking
statement in
from
the
it,
House
Harriet,
of Commons, and we wouldn't have had all this evidence to the Select Committee if he hadn't have fired Ollie Robbins, and he could have done all the investigations and then possibly done due process of disciplining and firing Ollie Robbins, but not actually a summary dismissal, which has made the whole thing blow up.
To reflect what Harriet just said, I was talking to a very senior former number 10 figure the other day, and they said exactly that, which was this sacking of Ollie Robbins has come back so badly to backfire, because then he is now going to the Select Committee, and there's a number of things, like he wants to defend his reputation, right? He came from Goldman Sachs back into government. He's got sacked. He might want another job in the private sector. His reputation's been shredded. He might have a case for unfair dismissal, so he wants to build that case. So he was quite motivated in that Select Committee to give, a very, very, very thorough account of himself. And someone said to me, what they would have advised the PM to have done would be just suspend Ollie Robbins, have an investigation, and get to the bottom of it all. And that way, you could also still control the narrative a bit. You could control the voices. But by sacking him in that way, I sort of wonder whether the PM spit the dummy a bit, in the sense that he was so bloody angry that he kind of shot from the hip, when in fact maybe that wasn't a smart thing to do.
And if he hadn't have sacked Ollie, if he hadn't have sacked Ollie Robbins, he wouldn't have had to do the nearly 3 hours statement in the House of Commons on Monday, just a couple of weeks before the council elections, all about the Mandelson appointment. Imagine having 3 hours of the Prime Minister's time on the telly and all over the airwaves about the Mandelson appointment, which was precipitated by his sacking of Ollie Robbins. And he wouldn't have had hours of Ollie Robbins going before the Foreign Affairs Select Committee on the Tuesday unless he'd sacked him, because they wouldn't have been calling him in. So what he's done, he's set off a chain of events, and I don't think he would have even needed to suspend him.
So I think his critics, the Prime Minister's critics, will go, well, look, this is one of the fundamental problems that underpins the Starmer government, which is that Keir Starmer himself is crap at politics. And you don't actually need to be a genius to know that, firing Ollie Robbins would free him up to be able to speak his truth in a way that he wasn't the last time he went before the committee, when he was still in post. And I think that what's really interesting is we're recording this on Thursday afternoon. So we've had the Robbins testimony. We've had 3 hours of Keir Starmer, of his statement with question and answers. We've had Kat Little. She's the civil servant that's running the investigation at the Cabinet Office. We've also had a full parliamentary debate about this. And we still have some fundamental questions that we don't know the answer to. Fundamental question number one: why did the government feel that there wasn't a single soul in the diplomatic service able to do the job of American ambassador, and they had to go outside for a political appointment? And why did they think Mandelson was the right guy? We've still never heard them say why we thought we should do this in the first place. And the other really big question, I think, which is you know, Keir Starmer and all the loyalists are saying again and again and again, due process was followed at all times. We did this by the book. Everything was done by the book. Everybody says it was done by the book. All the people that are looking over our shoulder, over the people that were in post at the time shoulder, saying it was done by the book. Okay, so if due process was followed at all times, why did you sack the guy in charge of the process? Why did you sack Ollie Robbins?
Ruth, there are lots of questions to be answered. But I think that there is a logic in the Prime Minister saying, yes, I didn't mislead Parliament because I said due process was followed. And due process was followed because actually the FCDO did give him security clearance. But even though they followed due process, I had to fire the head of the FCDO because he showed such bad judgment by
And if bad
failing
judgment
to
is a
tell
sacking
me
offence
about it.
and you have to leave your post for it, where does that leave the Prime Minister? It's a cyclical argument, none of which looks good for Keir Starmer.
I mean, I have to say, just on that, when Starmer was in the Commons at Prime Minister's questions, Badenoch at the end of the session said, "You did not knowingly mislead the House." But then she referenced some of the things you were saying, Ruth, and about due process. And she says, but you have misled the House and you should resign. And I did think there was a certain irony in the fact that the Prime Minister had minutes before stood at the dispatch box and said that Ollie Robbins had made the wrong judgment or poor judgment, and therefore he had to go. And then on the Monday, the Prime Minister said it was poor judgment to appoint Mandelson and apologised. And Alanis Morissette jumped into my head, isn't it ironic? I said, can we put that in our digital video? And they're like, no, we can't afford the rights to Alanis Morissette, Beth. But, there is something in it, isn't there, where it's like, well, you sacked Ollie Robbins because of his wrong judgment, but you don't fall on your sword when you also acknowledge your wrong judgment. I mean, there is something in that, Harriet, isn't there?
Oh, I just want us all to be, it was such a bad decision. I want us all not to be discussing it. And I think that everybody else in the Labour Party doesn't want us all to be discussing it because there's no good answer to the question, why on earth did you appoint him in the first place? So that's why it's all terrible that it's gone ahead of the elections. And I think it's got a further way to go because there's going to be more documents coming out after the council elections because the Intelligence and Security Committee have been clearing all of these documents. So there's lots more documents going to come out.
I want to ask you two more things, though. Just on this Intelligence and Security Committee, if you've all forgotten, which you would be completely in your rights to forget this, the Intelligence and Security Committee is a group of MPs and Lords, and it's a confidential committee, and they look at matters of national security. And what they have been tasked with is going through all of the documents released by the government around Peter Mandelson, and they're going through them to work out what can be published and what cannot be published in the national interest vis-a-vis national security. So it's a judgment call from them. Do you think that the Intelligence and Security Committee should or could release that vetting advice? Because that would be quite something when these things are meant to be highly confidential and it's about personal information. Do you think that's going to get released, or do you think there's not a hope in hell of that?
Well, this is one of the things that Ollie Robbins spent a lot of time talking about when he gave evidence to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, because he said you have to make absolutely sure that everybody is completely confident that when they go into the developed vetting process, that it will never go any further, because they subject themselves to a lot of investigation. It's not just questions about your sex life, about your drug use, about your financial situation. They also require you to produce all your bank statements, all sorts of health records. They go round all your business associates, current and former friends, and call them up and ask them about you. It is a majorly intrusive process. And the reason for doing that is to make absolutely sure that you know if it's the right judgment to actually appoint somebody to a particular post. And They're worried that if it comes out that at some future date your security vetting information could be put in the public domain, that nobody would be prepared to actually put themselves forward for these jobs which require developed vetting. But on the other hand, so that's the don't publish argument. But on the other hand, the do publish argument is that if the Prime Minister, the implication of what the Prime Minister is saying is that the developed vetting threw up things which showed that there was a major risk to national security and our standing in the world by appointing Peter Mandelson, then people need to know that the system actually failed and that the developed vetting, which is for a purpose, which is to actually protect this country, didn't actually work. So I think in a way that the balance of public interest, which it will be difficult for the Intelligence and Security Committee, I think there's a strong argument for them, although they will be mindful about the worry of the developed vetting system being exposed to public gaze, there is an argument for them saying when they send back the documents to the Cabinet Office, actually, you can publish this.
So I don't think they will show us what the outcome of that was. I don't think they will, because I think there will be somewhere a political judgment that is the Prime Minister probably won't survive, so it's not worth rolling in behind him to go the extra mile to show him it. I think they won't because, like Harriet says, it undoes the whole system. The whole system unravels for this one case, and I think the system is more important, and the trust in the system is more important than the outcome of this one case, even if it's an outcome that may or not bring down a Prime Minister.
Just a final thought on that as well. Like, it could be a double-edged sword for him, because on the one hand, if they did publish it and it was really terrible, it would justify his position in a way of sacking Ollie Robbins after he'd seen the advice and criticising Robbins for not checking the summary. Or Robbins said, that was my job not to. That's the process in the civil servant. But also, it will just be really awkward for Starmer, because it will just make the original judgment look even worse. Like, there'll just be another row over the appointment in the first place. But what I wanted to ask you both as well is, Morgan McSweeney is coming to the Select Committee next Tuesday. The PM's ex-chief of staff who resigned over the Mandelson affair a few months ago. Is that going to be a help or hinder? How do we think that's going to go down?
I don't know what Morgan McSweeney's like. I don't even think I know what his voice is like. And Harriet, in terms of that kind of view, of that punter view of whether he sits there, are we going to believe him? Are we going to find him likable, credible, open, transparent? Like, what do you think that the public are going to see when they see this guy whose name they've read in the papers so much, but who've never actually seen him speak with his own voice?
Well, I think it's going to be very difficult when Morgan McSweeney gives evidence, because if he sort of takes responsibility and says, yes, it was entirely my decision to insist on Peter Mandelson becoming our ambassador to the United States, then that means that Keir Starmer wasn't implicated, but it means that Keir Starmer was allowing Morgan McSweeney to take these important decisions. So, but if he implies that Keir Starmer was driving the decision to appoint Peter Mandelson, then it makes it look as though Keir Starmer is making big decisions as Prime Minister, but unfortunately making the wrong ones. So I think it's a no-win on the question of the appointment of Peter Mandelson when Morgan McSweeney comes before the FCDO. From when I worked with Morgan McSweeney long ago, when he was looking after Labour councils in London, he was just a very courteous, intelligent, hardworking person. So what's become the caricature of him now, I can't recognise at all. So I shall be once again consuming many hours of Select Committee appearances. Seems to be my whole life now.
Parliament TV's never been so good. I mean, Ruth, it's a really good question. And actually, when you said it, because I do know Morgan McSweeney a little bit, it made me think of when Dominic Cummings, you remember Boris Johnson's former chief of staff, famed for Barnard Castle,
Yeah.
when he went in front of the select committee to machine gun Boris Johnson, and what a kind of massive moment in Westminster that was. I think with McSweeney, you're going to see a very different character. He's very softly spoken. He will be very understated in his delivery. The problem is in the Labour Party, many people that are opposed to Starmer and actually kind of helped kind of create and then kind of were very keen for him to get rid of Morgan McSweeney. Actually, I was thinking this week, had Morgan McSweeney been in post this week, it would have been even worse for Starmer, wouldn't it? If he says, I'm responsible for the decisions that make Starmer look weak and not in control or command of his government, which is what everyone thinks anyway. And then if he says, oh no, the Prime Minister was aware of all of it, it makes Starmer look
guilty?
Like guilty and really dishonest. And I would say at this point of the game with Starmer, that would be more damaging for him, because actually the fact that he was not in control of events or watching events is kind of priced in at the moment. But the idea that he kind of knew what was going on and he was gung-ho behind having Mandelson in post makes it look even worse. And maybe it will be. I don't know. I don't know what Morgan's going to say.
So I think there is a grading of how helpful he can be in all of this. But I do wonder how much of that sort of detail really captures the public's attention. I think we still come back in all of this. We come back to the original sin, which is everybody knew Peter Mandelson was dodgy as hell. Even he called himself the Prince of Darkness. Why the heck did you want to appoint him in the first place? Of course it blew up in your face. What an idiot you are, Prime Minister. That seems to be the original sin, isn't it?
I think I want to go back to kind of the fundamental question in all of this, which is, do you both think that the Prime Minister can survive this?
I mean, obviously he could survive it. He's got a massive majority. The only people that can bring him down are his own backbenchers. But 2-1 on, I reckon that we'll have a Labour leadership election by party conference in October.
I think being in political office is a bit like a bank account, is that you're either paying in because things are going well and you're making decisions that are good decisions and things are working out in the way that you want, and then your bank account is going up, or things are going badly and you're withdrawing. And this is definitely on the withdrawing side. You just don't want to get into an unauthorized overdraft. So your bank balance can go up and down, but you don't want to get to where you're seriously in overdraft. This has undoubtedly taken money out of his political account.
How much has he got left in his account, Harriet?
Well, it goes up and down. It's not, it's not great, and there's a lot of apprehension ahead of the elections. So
I would say by this point, Harriet, Lord Ali's having to buy his clothes for him again.
But I think that what's difficult to know we don't know what the result of the elections are going to be. It might be that they're not as absolutely dire as people are predicting. Some people are saying, well, I see the polls, but actually in my area, it's not that bad. So it might be that the election results are not that bad. And secondly, if they are terribly bad, how much is priced in, how much people are resigned to it, or how much will the emotional feel of it change the political climate? It's one thing to look at the polls and see wipeout in Scotland or Wales or bad results in England. The polls are just the polls. People feel differently about things once the voters have actually had their say. So I think that there's a lot hanging on the council elections and what people's response are to them.
Now, as I mentioned earlier, I spoke to Zach Polanski, leader of the Green Party, and you can find all of that content over all of our Sky News platforms over the next few days. And we got through quite a lot. He told me about what success looked like in the May elections. He explained his position on Britain's defence, and also because I absolutely had to, especially after I read that article, I asked him about his claims back in 2013 that he could make women's breasts grow bigger through hypnosis. What did he have to say about that? And I have to say, I read this article, I found it really weird. Like, why did you do that?
Yeah, the article's nonsense, and I've apologised for it several times, and I stick by that apology.
Why do you say the article's... I've got the quotes, I read it. There were direct quotes from you.
Because it was...
Was the article... Why are you saying the article's nonsense? You clearly did it, and then a few days later you went on the BBC radio and you repeated it.
Well, as I said, or you said, it was 13 years ago.
I know that. That's not what I'm asking. I found it weird. I want to understand why you did
and
it.
it definitely, it was the Sun journalist's idea, and I should have said no.
So yeah, do go check it out. Check it out in full. There is so much in there. Also, we love hearing from you, so do please drop any comments below. We want to hear all your thoughts, whether it's on that or whether it's on Peter Mandelson continuing to haunt Keir Starmer yet again.
Well, we'll be back with another episode next Friday, but if you do want to get in touch on the burner phone, and I hope you will, the number is 07934 200 444, or you can email us at electoraldysfunction@sky.uk. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.